The winter of 1899 arrived long before the villagers of Helmgrove were ready for it. In the highlands between the crumbling borders of the eastern kingdoms, snow began falling in early October, gentle at first, like feathers shaken loose from the sky, then heavier, thicker, a relentless white veil that dimmed the world. By November, the roads had vanished. By December, the river froze so solid that even children could walk across it without fear. By January, it was clear that the winter would not merely linger, it would consume. The people of Helmgrove had lived through difficult seasons before. They were used to shortages, to storms, to hearing the distant echoes of cannons from the valley front lines where the nations to the east and west clashed in their endless struggle for borders that had changed hands too many times to count. But this winter was something else entirely. It was too cold, too silent, too heavy. A winter that felt as if the sky itself had decided to punish the living. In the dead of night, when the wind howled against the wooden shutters of the cottages, it rattled like skeletal fingers demanding to be let inside. Families huddled together around dying hearths, their breath misting in the frozen air inside their own homes. Oil for lanterns was scarce. Firewood even scarcer. Rumors spread like frostbite, that the war had worsened, that supply lines were cut, that entire towns had vanished under snowstorms so thick no soldier dared march through them. And in the midst of all this lived Alara Voss, a young woman of 23, whose quiet strength made her something of a pillar for the fading village. She was slender, pale from the cold, with hair the color of chestnuts and eyes a deep, resolute gray. Her father had been a soldier, one of the early casualties of the territorial war that had begun when she was just a child. Her mother followed years later, taken by a fever after a cruel winter almost as cold as this one. Alara had lived alone ever since. And though others offered to take her in, she preferred her small cottage at the edge of the forest, close to the towering pines that groaned under the weight of the snow. She preferred solitude to pity, and quiet endurance to despair. On the first day of the new year, the sky bruised purple with storm clouds, Alara wrapped herself in a wool cloak and stepped outside to fetch firewood. The air sliced her lungs, painfully sharp. The snow reached her knees. She moved slowly, listening to the sounds, or the absence of them. Even birds had stopped singing. Even wolves had retreated deeper into the woods. As she lifted a bundle of wood, she noticed something unusual, faint tremors beneath the snow, like the earth shivering. Then she heard it. Not the wind. Not storm. But distant thunder, no, not thunder. The deep, rolling growl of artillery. The war had moved closer. She straightened, heart pounding, straining her ears. The echoes traveled through the mountains, muffled by snow but unmistakable. The front was no longer miles away, it was coming toward them. When she returned to her cottage, she found her neighbor, old Marek, waiting outside. His beard was white as frost, his eyes watery from age and cold. "You heard it, didn't you?" he asked without preamble. Alara nodded. "How close are they?" "Closer every day. The refugees from Westbrook say the armies are already fighting along the riverbank. That's only 10 miles from here." "Aye." Marek looked at the darkening sky. "And the snow's only making it worse. Soldiers are freezing before they reach the battlefield." Alara closed her eyes, imagining wounded men collapsing into drifts, disappearing under falling flakes. She had seen the aftermath of war before, the bodies carted through Helmgrove, the widows waiting in silence. But the idea of war and winter merging into one merciless force chilled her more than the wind ever could. "Will they come through the village?" she asked. Marek shrugged. "If the passes remain blocked, they might. Armies don't stop for snow." But people did. People starved. People froze. Before they could speak further, a shrill cry echoed through the village square. A boy, young Tomas, no more than 12, came running down the path, slipping and falling in the snow. "Alara! Marek! Come quick," he yelled, breathless. "There's someone in the woods." Alara exchanged a look with Marek before hurrying after Tomas. The villagers gathered, their faces pale in the dim light. Children peeked from doorways. Women clutched shawls tighter. Men gripped tools that might double as weapons, axes, pitchforks, anything. At the edge of the forest lay a figure half buried in snow. A man. Alara rushed forward without thinking. She knelt beside him, brushing snow from his face. He was young, maybe 30, with dark hair matted by frost. His lips were blue. His hands stiff. His cloak torn, revealing a military emblem stitched onto the collar. A soldier. But not from their side. Alara felt the villagers behind her stiffen as they recognized the crest, enemy forces from the Western Coalition. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "We should leave him," someone muttered. "He's the enemy," another hissed. "If he wakes, he'll bring others. He'll die anyway." Alara ignored them. She placed 2 fingers against the soldier's neck. A pulse. Faint, but there. "He's alive," she said. Marek frowned. "Alara, think carefully. If the war reaches us." "If," she snapped. "This man is freezing now." "We don't have enough to spare," said a woman, clutching her thin shawl. "Not for one of them." Alara's jaw tightened. She looked around at their faces, tired, afraid, hardened by too many winters and too much loss. Yet she refused to accept that compassion was another casualty of war. "If we leave him," she said quietly, "we are no different from the war that has taken so much from all of us." The villagers fell silent. And then, reluctantly, Marek stepped forward. "Bring him to my house. My hearth still has some heat." Alara nodded, grateful. Together they lifted the unconscious soldier, his body limp and freezing. As they carried him through the village, she noticed how the sky grew darker, snow swirling harder. The storm was gathering again. Inside Marek's cottage, they laid the soldier near the fire. His skin was icy, his breath shallow. Alara removed his frozen gloves, wincing at the sight of his frostbitten fingers. "He must have been separated from his unit," she murmured. "Or deserted," Marek said quietly. Alara looked at the insignia again. Not a common infantry mark, something higher. A scout? A messenger? A deserter would not carry documents, but a scout might. Suddenly she noticed a small leather satchel strapped beneath his cloak. "What is that?" Marek asked. Alara hesitated before unbuckling it. Inside were several rolled papers, sealed with wax. Military documents. Important ones. Messages that might determine the outcome of the war. Her heart raced. This man wasn't just a soldier. He was a courier. And whatever he carried, the armies would come searching for it. "Alara," Marek whispered, "what have we brought into the village?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because suddenly, the distant echoes of artillery returned, louder this time, followed by faint, rhythmic thuds of marching. The war was coming. And it was coming tonight. Alara looked down at the unconscious soldier, at the documents that might doom or save countless lives, and she felt the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. Should she hide him? Hand him over? Burn the documents? Save him, or save the village? Outside, the wind howled like the wail of a dying world. Inside, the fire crackled weakly. And Alara understood, with a sinking dread, that everything, her village, her future, her very life, was about to be caught between the unforgiving jaws of winter and war. The night was only beginning. And the winter that refused to end was about to reveal its darkest secrets. The storm arrived with a fury that seemed almost intentional, as if the sky itself wished to erase every trace of life across the frozen land. Snow hammered the rooftops of Helmgrove, rattled the wooden beams of Marek's cottage, and filled the narrow paths with drifts taller than a grown man. The wind was a beast, snarling, relentless, tearing at doors and window shutters with icy claws. Inside, the atmosphere was equally restless. Alara sat beside the soldier, who lay wrapped in blankets near the hearth. His breathing was still shallow, but warmer now, no longer the faint gasp of someone slipping toward death. His fingers had regained a hint of color. But the frostbite, that would leave scars. Marek paced the room while muttering under his breath. His worry, usually quiet and contained, now spilled into every motion. "They'll come looking," he said for the fifth time, glancing toward the frost-covered window. "Couriers don't get separated by accident." Alara looked at the satchel on the table, those wax-sealed papers, the insignia stamped in deep red. The symbol of the Western Coalition, the rival of the Eastern Kingdoms. The enemy of her land. "What if we return the documents to them?" Alara asked softly. "If they're so important." Marek turned sharply. "And lead an entire battalion straight to our doorstep? They'd burn Helmgrove just to be safe." Alara swallowed hard. He was right. The door suddenly shook under a violent gust of wind. Snowflakes whirled inside through the cracks. The dim fire flickered. Marek hurried to reinforce the latch. But Alara's attention snapped back to the soldier when he stirred. He groaned, weak, disoriented, and his hand twitched as if searching for something. His eyelids trembled before slowly lifting. Gray-blue eyes, sharp even in exhaustion, stared up at the low ceiling, then across the room, then at Alara. For a moment, neither moved. Then he tried to sit up. Alara pushed gently against his shoulder. "Don't. You're injured." His breath came out in uneven rasps. His voice was rough, strained. "Where am I?" "Helmgrove," Alara replied. "A village in the highlands. You were found in the snow." The soldier's gaze darted around. He spotted the satchel. Panic flashed across his face. "My dispatches." "They're safe," Alara said. Marek scoffed. "Safe is not the word I'd use." The soldier tried again to rise, but his body trembled, and he fell back with a wince of pain. "Those documents must reach General Rothan. If they don't, you think we'd help you?" Marek snapped. "You're the enemy." The soldier's jaw clenched. "Enemy or not, the Eastern forces are planning to push through the northern pass. If my commanders don't know in time, thousands will die." Alara stiffened. Marek folded his arms. "And why should we believe a word from you?" The soldier exhaled slowly. "Because I have no reason to lie. If I wanted you dead, I'd have stayed with my unit." They were headed straight through the valley, toward the frozen river. "Toward your villages." Alara felt a chill that had nothing to do with winter. "Are you saying the front is moving directly toward us?" "Yes," he said. "The pass collapsed from snowfall. Both armies are being forced north. Helmgrove lies between them." Marek muttered a curse. "All this time, we thought the worst thing we faced was the cold." Alara stared at the soldier. "What is your name?" He hesitated. "Rowan Hale." "A scout. A courier. A man who had likely seen more violence in the past year than most villagers witnessed in a lifetime." "Rowan," Alara said quietly, "if the armies come through here, they'll burn the village, won't they?" He didn't answer. His silence was confirmation enough. A sudden pounding shook the door. Not the wind this time. 3 hard knocks. Then another 3. Then silence. Marek froze. Alara's breath caught. Rowan strained to listen despite his weakness. A muffled voice called through the storm. "Open up. By order of the Eastern Battalion, open the door." Marek's eyes widened in terror. "The army, here?" Alara grabbed Rowan's satchel and shoved it under the floorboard near the hearth. Her hands trembled. The knocking grew louder. Fiercer. Impatient. "Alara," Rowan whispered urgently, "don't let them find me." She looked at him, pale, injured, helpless. The enemy. A soldier whose documents might shift the war against her people. But also a man she had saved. "Alara," the voice outside bellowed. "We saw tracks leading here. Open the door, or we break it down." Marek moved toward the latch, but his hand shook too much to undo it. Alara stepped forward. The cold rushed inside the moment she cracked the door open. Snow spiraled past her feet. 5 soldiers in tattered Eastern uniforms stood outside, their faces red from the cold, their breath heavy. One of them, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, stared at her with narrowed eyes. "You sheltering anyone?" he demanded. Alara forced her voice steady. "No. Just an old man and myself." The soldier pushed past her into the cottage as if he owned it. His men followed, stomping snow onto the wooden floor. Their eyes scanned everything, the hearth, the table, the single bed in the corner. Rowan lay on the floor beside the fire, wrapped in blankets, face half-shadowed. Alara's heart slammed against her ribs. The scarred soldier's gaze fell on Rowan. "Who is that?" Alara stepped quickly between them. "A villager. Marek's nephew. Frostbitten while gathering wood." Marek stared at her, startled, but said nothing. The soldier approached Rowan slowly. Rowan kept his eyes almost closed, feigning unconsciousness. "You," the soldier growled, "let me see your hands." Alara felt her breath stop. If he saw the frostbite patterns, if he recognized military damage. Rowan lifted his hands weakly. They were wrapped in cloth. The soldier ripped the cloth aside. Marek winced. Alara bit her lip. The soldier's brow furrowed. Severe frostbite. What fool wanders outside in a storm like this? Marek spoke quickly. "The boy's stubborn. Thinks he's strong." Rowan managed a weak, raspy sound, half groan, half cough. The soldier huffed and stepped back. "We're searching for a Western courier. Enemy rider. Fell from his horse a few miles south. Tracks lead toward your village." Alara forced her expression to remain neutral. "We haven't seen any soldiers." He stared at her for several long, suffocating seconds. Then, a howl of wind tore through the doorway. One of the soldiers outside shouted, "Sir! You need to see this." The scarred officer turned and marched back into the storm. His men followed, boots thudding across the snow. Alara and Marek exchanged a glance before hurrying after them. Outside, the night sky glowed red. Not fire. Not lanterns. But torches, hundreds of them, snaking through the forest on the western ridge. A massive formation. An entire marching battalion. Heading toward Helmgrove. The officer swore under his breath. "They've moved faster than expected. Rally the villagers. Prepare defenses. We might be fighting here before dawn." Alara stared in horror at the approaching lights. A burning river of soldiers cutting through the night. The snowstorm did nothing to slow them. The war was no longer approaching. It had arrived. Behind her, Rowan weakly leaned against the doorway, clutching the frame for support. His eyes widened as he saw the torches. "They're early," he whispered. "Too early." Alara turned to him, panic rising. "Rowan, what does that mean?" Rowan swallowed hard, pain etched across his face. "It means," he said, "that they must have already intercepted part of my message." Marek whispered, aghast, "So they know the pass collapsed?" Rowan nodded grimly. "They know, and they're taking advantage of it." Alara stared at him, snow blowing around them, the glow of war lighting the horizon. "What will happen to the village?" she asked. Rowan's answer was immediate. "If both armies meet here." His voice cracked with dread. "Helmgrove will be wiped from the map." The storm screamed overhead. Torches advanced from the west. And from the east, faint at first, then slowly rising, came the drumming of approaching infantry. The village was trapped. Between winter. Between war. Between death marching from both sides. The night would not end quietly. The torches from the western ridge flickered like a serpent of fire winding down the forest path. Their light trembled through the storm, hundreds of flames bending and snapping in the wind, each one carried by a soldier wrapped in layers of frost-coated wool. The sound of their march, crunching snow, clattering steel, muffled commands, drifted through the night like the approach of something ancient and unstoppable. Across the opposite hill, faint but growing stronger, came a rival rhythm, the drumbeat of the Eastern infantry, steady and grim, thudding through the frozen earth with the weight of inevitability. Helmgrove lay in the valley between them. A village too small to be defended. Too quiet to withstand the storm. Too fragile to survive what was coming. Alara stood in the center of the village square as snow spiraled around her, her breath thick in the frigid air. Panic erupted among the villagers like fire. Mothers hurried to gather children. Men shouted instructions no one could hear. Some people cried. Some prayed. Others stared numbly at the crimson glow of torches spreading across the ridge. Marek grabbed Alara's arm. "We need to get everyone into the forest. If we stay here..." A horn blast cut through the wind, deep and mournful, echoing across the valley. It came from the Eastern Battalion. Then, moments later, another horn answered from the western ridge. Two armies calling to each other. Two predators acknowledging the presence of the other in the snow. "They'll meet here," Rowan said behind them. He was leaning heavily on the doorframe of Marek's cottage, his face pale, breath trembling. He had no strength to stand long, but the fire of urgency kept him upright. "They'll fight in the forest first. And when the lines break, the battle will spill into the village." Alara's stomach twisted. "You said thousands would die." Rowan nodded grimly. "Yes. And the storm will hide the screams." Marek turned toward him sharply. "What about your message? What did it say? Why are they moving so fast?" Rowan swallowed, bracing himself. The Eastern artillery planned a full assault through the northern pass. But heavy snow collapsed the cliffs earlier than expected. Half their equipment is trapped. They're exposed. Vulnerable. Alara felt her chest tighten. "So your commanders want to strike before the eastern side recovers. And the Eastern Army," Rowan continued, "is trying to retreat north to regroup. They're not looking for a fight tonight, but they won't back down if confronted." Marek hissed under his breath. "So we're caught between a retreating army and an advancing one." Rowan nodded. "And both desperate enough to burn anything in their path." A violent gust slammed through the square, lifting snow into the air like a cloud of white dust. The villagers shrieked as lanterns were extinguished. Darkness deepened. The only light came from the torches on the ridge, a sea of fire waiting to descend. Alara raised her voice, trying to steady the fear around her. "We need to move. Now. Into the woods, north side, away from the main path." But even as she spoke, the first signal arrow streaked through the sky. A burning shot of fire. Arcing over the village. Landing in the snow with a hiss. A warning shot. A declaration. A promise. The Western Army had seen movement in the village. And they did not trust shadows. Rowan's eyes widened. "They think Helmgrove is sheltering Eastern scouts. They're preparing to sweep the village." Alara felt her heartbeat slam like a drum. "If they sweep," Marek said shakily, "they'll kill anyone they find." The second arrow launched. Then the third. Then 10 more. They rained down like sparks from a falling comet, lighting the sky in orange streaks. The villagers screamed. Children ducked. Snow exploded in small bursts around them. "They're signaling." Rowan gasped. "Their cavalry is moving." And through the wind, faint but growing louder, came the unmistakable sound of hooves striking frozen ground. A horse charge, unstoppable, heedless of the storm. Alara made the quickest decision of her life. "Take Rowan," she told Marek. "Get to the northern tree line. Now." Marek sputtered. "But you..." "I'll help the others." "Go." Rowan tried to protest, but the pain in his ribs forced him silent. Marek grabbed him beneath the arm, hauling him away through deep snow, Rowan's boots dragging behind. Alara turned back to the villagers. "Move," she shouted, guiding the terrified crowd toward the north. "Stay together. Leave everything." A boy slipped on the ice. Elara lifted him. A woman clutched her infant. Elara pushed her forward. A man carrying his elderly mother stumbled, and Elara took some of the weight. The storm roared. Arrows fell. Torches advanced like a tide. And then, the worst sound yet. A trumpet blast from the western ridge. Followed by another from the east. Elara froze. Rowan, being dragged toward the forest, looked back over his shoulder with dread in his eyes. "They've seen each other," he whispered. In that moment, across the snow-covered valley, two armies realized their enemy was closer than they thought. And the storm concealed their distance. Which meant only one thing. They would not wait. They would not retreat. They would not negotiate. Both sides gave the same order at almost the same moment. Charge. Helmgrove became a death trap. A thunder of hooves erupted from the west. Firelit cavalry descended the ridge like a wave of shadows. From the east, infantry surged forward, shouting battle cries that twisted into the wind. Steel met snow. Snow met flame. The world shook. The villagers scattered, screams swallowed by the blizzard. Elara felt the ground tremble as horses barreled down the hill. She threw herself into the snow, pulling two children with her just as riders thundered past, their hooves inches from her face. The children sobbed into her coat. The eastern infantry crashed into the square moments later, clashing with western horseback soldiers. Blades slashed. Sparks flew. Snow turned red. Elara could barely see. The battle swallowed everything: sound, sight, breath. A soldier stumbled toward her, clutching his stomach, blood staining the snow behind him. Another collapsed nearby. Men screamed commands in two different languages, neither side hearing the other. Helmgrove's peaceful square became a battlefield of chaos. "Elara," someone shouted through the storm. She turned. Rowan. He had broken free from Marek and was struggling toward her, feet sinking into deep snow, his body shaking from cold and pain. His eyes locked onto hers, urgent, pleading. "We have to leave," he yelled. "Now." Elara grabbed the children and forced herself to her feet. Rowan reached her, grabbing her arm with his frostbitten hand. A roar sounded behind them, an explosion of fire as a lantern shattered against a cottage wall, igniting dry wood. Flames spread instantly. The wind fed them. Helmgrove began to burn. "Elara!" Rowan shouted again. "Run!" The two armies clashed around them. Buildings ignited. Snow turned to steam. Shadows collided with steel. And above all, the storm raged, furious and unrelenting. Elara ran. Rowan stumbled beside her. Children cried in her arms. The roar of battle chased them through the storm. And behind them, the village of Helmgrove, her home, disappeared into a blinding swirl of fire and snow. The sky over Helmgrove burned with a strange, unsettling glow, orange from the torches of the approaching Western Battalion, white-blue from lightning tearing through the snowstorm, and dull red from distant artillery flashes that echoed through the valley. The entire horizon looked alive, shifting and trembling like something breathing in the darkness. Inside Marek's cottage, the air was thick with tension. Rowan struggled to sit upright, pale but alert now. Elara knelt beside him, pressing a steaming cloth against his bruised ribs. He winced but did not pull away. "You are not strong enough to stand," Elara said softly. Rowan shook his head. "Strength doesn't matter anymore. If I cannot warn your people, the village will be crushed between both sides." Marek scowled. "They won't listen to you. You're the enemy." "I'm not asking them to trust me," Rowan answered. "I'm asking them to survive." Outside, the storm's roar intensified. Snow hammered the roof, and wind crept through the gaps in the walls. Every noise felt like a signal of oncoming doom. A sudden pounding struck the door. Not the soldiers this time. Villagers. "Elara!" Marek. Come out quickly. Marek hesitated, then pushed the door open. In the blinding flurry stood a group of villagers, men wrapped in fur coats, women with lanterns, children clutching blankets in fear. At the front was Aldrich, the village headman. His beard glittered with ice. Alara, he said, breath steaming in the cold, the Eastern commander demands all villagers gather in the square. They're preparing defenses. They say we have less than an hour. Marek's eyes widened. Less than an hour until both armies collide? Aldrich nodded grimly. And Helmgrove is in the center of their path. Alara felt her stomach twist. What do they want us to do? They want us to evacuate the women and children up the ridge. The men must stay to support the soldiers. Rowan, leaning against the doorway for support, spoke weakly. No. You can't stay. None of you. You must evacuate everyone. Aldrich's eyes narrowed. You. You're the courier they're hunting. Marek stepped between them. He's injured. Leave him be. But Aldrich ignored the old man. He stepped forward, gripping Rowan's collar. Why should we listen to anything you say? You carry the enemy's orders. You bring danger into our home. Rowan did not fight back. Because your ridge is not safe. The West Battalion is sending flank units around it. You'll be caught. The only safe path is through the southern woods. A murmur of fear spread through the villagers. Aldrich tightened his grip. You expect us to trust your word? Alara stepped forward, her voice firm. Rowan has no reason to lie. If he wanted us dead, he would have stayed in the snow. Aldrich's gaze turned sharp. Alara, your kindness will doom us. Before anyone could argue further, a deafening blast shook the earth. Boom. The shockwave cracked ice loose from rooftops. Snow rained down. Children screamed. Windows splintered. Artillery. A second blast followed. Then a third. The Western Battalion had begun firing warning shells into the outskirts of the forest, testing the snowbanks, clearing their path. Aldrich stumbled back, fear carved into his features. It's begun. Rowan pushed himself upright, leaning heavily on the wall. Listen to me. If you move now, right now, you can escape through the southern woods before the Western scouts cut off the path. Aldrich hesitated. Alara stepped close, grabbing his arm. Please. If you care for the village, trust him. Another blast thundered across the valley, closer now. Aldrich finally nodded. Gather everyone. We leave through the woods. But just as relief washed over the villagers, a new set of lights appeared through the snowstorm. Lanterns. Dozens of them. Swinging in formation. The Eastern Army. They marched into the village square with weapons drawn and shields raised, pushing through terrified villagers. Their commander, Captain Ilian Rhodes, rode a warhorse wrapped in frost and sweat. His face was stern, ice-crusted, and furious. When he saw Aldrich and the others, he raised his voice. No one leaves this village. By decree of the Eastern Kingdom, Helmgrove is to be held until reinforcements arrive. Alara's heart plummeted. Reinforcements? In this storm? But Rowan whispered bitterly, reinforcements won't come. They're pinned by the avalanche to the southeast. Aldrich tried to argue. Captain, we can't stay here. The captain glared. You will do as commanded. Behind him, Eastern soldiers began erecting barricades using carts, barrels, and broken furniture. They moved with practiced precision, preparing the village for a brutal standoff. Rowan leaned heavily against Alara, whispering urgently, if they stay, the Western artillery will shred the village. You must get them out. Alara looked helplessly between Rowan, Aldrich, and the Eastern soldiers. How? They outnumber us. They're armed. Rowan's jaw tightened. There is one way. She met his gaze. What is it? Cut their supply torch line, Rowan whispered. If the torches along the ridge go out, the Eastern soldiers will think the storm is too dangerous. They'll retreat into the forest to regroup. Aldrich overheard part of the whisper. What is he saying? What plan is this? Alara took a breath. There's a way to make the Eastern Army fall back long enough for us to escape. Aldrich narrowed his eyes. At what risk? Rowan answered for her. At mine. Alara turned to him sharply. You can't walk. I don't need to walk, Rowan said. I only need to reach the torchline. Marek stepped forward. You'll freeze before you reach the ridge. Rowan's expression hardened. If I don't try, you'll freeze, or burn, along with your village. But before they could decide, a horn blast echoed through the storm. A deep, bellowing sound. The Western Battalion's charge signal. The lights on the ridge moved faster. Soldiers formed lines. Shadows advanced through the trees. Captain Rhodes shouted, "Positions!" Rowan grabbed Alara's wrist. Alara, if you're going to help your people escape, you must choose now. The world around them erupted into chaos. Shouts. Running feet. Flashes of gunfire through the snow. The war had not just arrived. It was stepping into their streets. And Alara knew. There was no turning back. A terrible quiet fell over Helmgrove, one so unnatural that even the wind seemed to hesitate. The snow no longer drifted gently, it sliced sideways in razor streaks as the storm thickened, turning the world into a shifting white void. Lanterns flickered behind shuttered windows, shadows trembling like frightened hearts. Alara stood near the village square with Rowan beside her, though he could barely stay upright. His breath escaped in short clouds, his injury worsening with every passing minute. Marek supported him, one arm braced across Rowan's back, muttering a prayer that vanished into the howl of the storm. From the ridge to the west, the orange glow of torches flickered like serpents winding their way toward the village. From the east, the dull thud of boots grew louder, steady, disciplined, ominous. The eerie rhythm of two armies marching through snow pressed closer, compressing Helmgrove between them like a trapped animal. Alara, Rowan whispered, listen carefully. There will be no negotiations tonight. When these armies collide, the village is the battlefield. Alara's heart thudded painfully. There must be something we can do. Anything. There is, Rowan said, his voice raw. But you won't like it. Marek shot him a glare. No riddles, boy. Speak plainly. Rowan took a slow, painful breath. Your Eastern soldiers don't know the enemy's plan. They don't know the pass collapsed, or that the Western Battalion is advancing through the storm to surround them. He pointed toward the documents hidden beneath the floorboard. The information I carry, it can stop the Eastern Army from marching blindly into slaughter. You mean, Alara swallowed. You want to give them the message? Rowan nodded with grim certainty. If the Eastern commander reads it, he will pull his forces back. He must retreat south, away from the village. Away from the collision point. Marek stared at him in disbelief. You're suggesting we help the enemy send a message that will save your army? Rowan shook his head. I'm suggesting we prevent both armies from butchering this village. Outside, another deep rumble echoed through the storm, the unmistakable grind of artillery wheels struggling over ice. Each crack of wood sounded like a promise of destruction. Alara looked between Rowan and Marek. We must decide quickly. The armies are minutes away. Marek clenched his jaw. If the Eastern commander realizes we hit a Western courier. He won't, Rowan rasped. The moment he sees the documents, he'll be too focused on the military consequences. Alara hesitated only a moment before she hurried inside Marek's cottage. She lifted the floorboard and retrieved the satchel, her fingers trembling around the cold leather. When she returned to the square, she held the dispatches out for Rowan. He shook his head weakly. You must take them. I can't walk that far. Alara, Marek said sharply, if they don't believe you. They will, she said. She didn't know why she believed it, but she did. There was no other path. Then, before she could move, a sudden clash of metal rang out from the eastern road. Lanterns flared. Soldiers appeared, dozens of them, stepping through the blinding snow, forming a defensive wall along the village entrance. Their commander, a broad man wearing a fur-lined coat, raised his torch high. "Villagers! Inside your homes at once. Combat is imminent." Alara stepped forward, clutching the satchel. "Commander! I have urgent information." He silenced her with one cold glance. "Not now. You'll be safe indoors." Rowan forced himself upright, gripping Marek for balance. "Alara. Now." The torchlight flickered across the commander's face, and for a moment, something in Alara's heart hardened. She had lived her whole life under the shadow of war. She had lost her father, her mother, her neighbors to it. She knew the arrogance of men who believed maps mattered more than lives. She stepped in front of him. "Commander, if you march toward the ridge, you will be slaughtered. The Western Battalion is already positioned there. You are walking into an ambush." The soldier nearest her scowled. "How would you know that?" Alara lifted the satchel. The commander froze. "What is that?" he demanded, stepping closer. "Dispatches," Alara said firmly. "From a Western courier. They contain troop movements, including the collapse of the northern pass." Gasps broke among the soldiers. Several shifted their stance, suddenly unsure. The commander narrowed his eyes. "Are you confessing to harboring an enemy messenger?" Marek stepped forward. "He was dying in the snow. Would you have let him freeze?" The commander glared at them both. "Where is the courier now?" Before Alara could answer, Rowan staggered into view. His cloak whipped violently in the wind, snow plastering his hair. Even half dead, he stood tall enough to draw the soldiers' attention. The Eastern commander drew his sword. Rowan did not flinch. "Take the documents," Rowan said hoarsely. "Read them. Or your men die tonight." Something in Rowan's voice, steadfast, fatalistic, cut through the storm better than any weapon. The commander paused. Slowly, with clear suspicion, he reached for the satchel. He tore the wax seal. Snow blew across the parchment as he read. His eyes widened, hardened, then narrowed again. Suddenly he barked an order, signaled a retreat horn. His captain stared at him, bewildered. "Sir? Do it. Now." A horn blew, a long, deep note that rolled across the mountains like a dying wail. Soldiers who had been positioning themselves shifted in confusion, then began falling back down the eastern road. The commander turned to Alara. "You may have saved hundreds of my men tonight." Then his gaze fell on Rowan. "But you, Western dog, if we ever cross paths again." Rowan gave a faint, exhausted smirk. "Then I hope it will be far from here." The eastern troops retreated down the southern pass, away from the oncoming Western Battalion. Torches snaked into the darkness, vanishing like dying stars. For one fragile moment, the village stood in silence. Then, from the forest ridge, a new roar erupted. The Western Army had seen the Eastern Lights retreating, and they assumed it was a tactical maneuver. Which meant only one thing. They were preparing to charge. Alara's blood ran cold. Rowan swayed on his feet. No, if they attack now, they'll burn the whole village thinking your message succeeded," Marek whispered. The storm howled louder. Helmgrove was not saved. Not yet. The worst was still coming. Dawn never came. The sun tried to rise, but its light could not pierce the furious storm that swallowed the highlands. The sky glowed a muted gray, heavy, swollen, almost metallic, like hammered iron held above the world. Snow fell in thick, relentless curtains, erasing shapes, hiding shadows, smothering every breath with cold. Helmgrove lay buried under nearly 2 meters of snow. Cottages groaned under the weight. Chimneys barely poked above the drifts. Even the church bell tower looked like a broken tooth rising from a white sea. But worse than the storm were the sounds. Distant. Muted. But unmistakable. Drums. Marching. Shouts carried by the wind. The mechanical scream of old artillery wheels forced across frozen ground. War was no longer approaching. War had settled in. Inside Marek's cottage, the tension was sharp enough to cut with a knife. The villagers who remained in the settlement, nearly 60 of them, gathered around the hearth, trembling, whispering in fear. Alara stood near the window, watching the swirling storm outside. Her cloak was wrapped tightly around her, but she still felt cold, as if the winter had seeped into her bones. Rowan sat on a stool beside her, exhausted but conscious at last. His frostbitten fingers were bound with strips of linen, and his steps were weak, but his eyes were alert, too alert. "They're preparing positions on both sides," he murmured, staring into the grey haze. "Your Eastern Battalion to the ridge. My coalition to the river path." Alara closed her eyes. "And we are caught in between." Rowan nodded, jaw tight. "This village is, strategically, a disaster. Both sides want the high ground. Both sides want shelter from the storm. Neither will yield." Marek, who was sharpening a small hatchet out of anxiety rather than purpose, snapped, "We're simple villagers, damn it. We didn't ask for any of this." Rowan lowered his gaze. "War doesn't ask what people want." The door burst open. Tomas, the 12-year-old boy who had first found Rowan in the snow, stumbled inside, panting. His hair and coat were coated in frost. "Alara, Marek, Rowan. You have to come see this." Marek frowned. "What now, boy?" "It's the sky." Alara exchanged a worried glance with Rowan before following Tomas outside. They trudged through snow nearly as tall as the child. The storm clawed at their faces. Then they saw it. Above the northern ridge, the snow clouds glowed a fierce orange-red, as if something was burning behind the storm. Not fire. Not torches. But explosions. A deep thundering rolled across the valley. The snow itself trembled. Rowan inhaled sharply. Mortar fire. "But who's firing first?" Alara asked. Rowan studied the glow. "The Eastern Battalion. They're trying to force the coalition back before they gather enough troops to encircle them." Another explosion lit the sky, brief, violent. The storm warped the color, turning the clouds into a shifting veil of blood and ash. Tomas whispered, trembling, "It looks like the world's ending." Alara squeezed his shoulder. She had no comforting words to offer. The scene above them felt apocalyptic, like some giant creature was clawing at the sky. Rowan suddenly staggered, gripping his chest. Alara rushed to support him. "Rowan, are you hurt?" "No," he gasped. "But this changes everything. If the eastern side starts with mortars, my generals will retaliate with full force. They'll try to break the flank before the storm closes the ridge." Marek cursed under his breath. "And they'll crush us in between." Rowan didn't deny it. His silence was worse. A horn suddenly blasted through the storm, low, mournful, echoing across the valley. The villagers flinched. A woman screamed. A baby wailed. "What is that?" Alara asked. Rowan's face drained of color. "That is a coalition war horn. They're signaling a field advance." "In this storm?" Marek barked. "Are they mad?" "They're desperate." The horn sounded again, longer, deeper, vibrating through the snow like a dying beast. Alara turned toward the forest path, barely visible, just a shadow in the blizzard. Shapes began to emerge. Dark. Tall. Moving slowly. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Rowan grabbed her wrist. "Inside. Now." They ran back to the cottage, Tomas stumbling behind them. Marek slammed the door shut, bolting it tightly. Villagers looked up in silence as Alara gasped, "They're coming, from the west." A ripple of panic tore through the room. Rowan limped toward the window and peered out. "They're not attacking yet." They're using the forest as cover. Cover for what? Tomas whispered. Rowan's answer chilled everyone's blood. For a surprise charge when the storm peaks. Alara's heart thudded violently. They'll slaughter the Eastern Battalion. And the village, Rowan added softly. Anyone in the way. The cottage erupted in fear. Where do we go? Should we run? The storm will kill us. We're trapped. Rowan breathed hard, forcing calm. Listen, listen. There's only one chance. Everyone fell silent. Rowan pointed toward the mountains. There's an abandoned mining tunnel near the frozen ridge. If we move the villagers there, they might survive the battle. Marek stared at him. You expect us to flee through a blizzard with children and old folk? You expect to survive a battlefield between two armies? Rowan shot back. Alara stepped closer. Is the tunnel stable? As stable as anything built 30 years ago. But it goes deep. It'll shield us from the fighting above ground. Alara, Tomas whispered, tugging her hand, I don't want to die. She knelt before him, brushing frost from his hair. You won't. But she wasn't sure if she believed her own words. Outside, another explosion tore through the storm, closer now, brighter, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Rowan straightened, breathing fast. We don't have hours. We have minutes. Alara nodded. Then we move. Gather everyone. The villagers dispersed in a frenzy. Cloaks, blankets, tools, anything they could carry. Babies were wrapped tightly. Elderly men were lifted onto makeshift sleds. The storm intensified, as if resisting them. Alara turned to Rowan. Can you walk? Rowan steadied himself against the wall. I'll crawl if I have to. She offered her arm. He took it. When they finally pushed open the door again, the world outside was nearly unrecognizable. Snow blistered sideways. The wind shrieked. The sky flashed orange, then red, then blinding white. Smoke drifted through the blizzard. Shadows, of soldiers, moved in the distance. And above it all, the war horns kept sounding, slow and grim, echoing across the dying valley. Alara held Rowan's arm tightly. Stay close, she whispered. He nodded. Stay alive. Together, they stepped into the storm, leading the villagers toward the mountain tunnel, while behind them, the first screams of the battlefield began to rise through the snow. The war had finally devoured the valley. And Helmgrove had only one chance left. The first light of dawn crept over the mountains like a dying ember, dim and colorless beneath the blanket of storm clouds. Snow still fell, slow now, softer, but its silence carried a weight heavier than the thunder of cannons the night before. The air was bitterly cold, sharp enough to sting the lungs of anyone who dared to breathe too deeply. What remained of Helmgrove lay quiet. No battle cries. No marching boots. No clash of steel. Only quiet. A quiet so deep it felt wrong. Alara moved through the village square slowly, each step sinking into untouched snow. Her cloak was torn, dusted with frost, and streaked with soot from the fires that had raged through the night. Her breaths came in short, foggy bursts as she scanned the devastation around her. Homes stood partially burned. Others had collapsed under the weight of snow and artillery. Doors hung open. Windows shattered. Tools and belongings littered the ground, abandoned in haste, in fear, or in the chaos of retreat. The war had passed through Helmgrove like a storm of fire and steel. But somehow, the village still stood. Barely. Bruised, scarred, but breathing. Behind her, Rowan walked with a limp, supported by a wooden cane they had fashioned from a broken fence post. His injuries had worsened in the chaos, his frostbitten hands wrapped carefully, his skin pale from blood loss, but his eyes were alert. Watching. Remembering. He stopped beside Alara. It's quiet. Too quiet, Alara murmured. The armies withdrew before dawn, Rowan said. Neither side expected the snow to swallow their flanks. The storm pushed them back. Alara turned to him sharply. Then, the village is safe? Safe for now, Rowan replied. But war never ends in a single night. A gust of wind swept through the square, carrying the faint metallic scent of spent gunpowder. Alara hugged her cloak tighter. Rowan, she said softly, what will you do now? This question had hung between them since the moment the fighting stopped. For a soldier, survival meant returning to command. Returning to war. Returning to the life he had been born into, one of duty, violence, and sacrifice. But Rowan did not answer immediately. He stared at the mountains, where the faint glow of torches from the retreating armies had vanished hours earlier. His jaw tightened, then loosened. At first, he said quietly, I thought I would return. Deliver what remained of the dispatch. Warn my commanders. He paused. But after last night, after seeing what war does to people who never asked to be part of it, I don't know if I can. Alara felt her chest tighten with something she did not want to name. If they find you, she whispered, they'll call you a deserter. Let them, Rowan said, his voice almost steady. I've carried messages for years. Death orders. Marching orders. Orders that led to villages like this being burned. Maybe it's time I carried something else. What? She asked. Hope, he said simply. The word struck her harder than any cannon blast. Before she could reply, Marek approached them, wrapped in a thick blanket, leaning on a stick. His face was bruised, but his eyes, tired, ancient, yet somehow bright, held a spark. Whatever happens next, he said, Helmgrove owes both of you its life. Alara shook her head. We only did what was necessary. Necessary? Marek chuckled softly. You saved a man you were told to hate. You protected a village about to be torn apart. And you stood your ground against two armies. He looked between them. If that isn't necessary, I don't know what is. He turned away to help the surviving villagers gather supplies. Rowan watched him go, then glanced at Alara. Alara, there's something else, he said. She met his eyes. What is it? Rowan hesitated. Snowflakes clung to his hair, melting slowly in the faint dawn light. He searched for words, then finally spoke them, soft as the winter wind. When I was lying by the fire, drifting in and out, I remember one thing clearly. He paused. Your voice. Alara felt warmth rise in her cheeks despite the cold. You kept calling me back, Rowan continued. Back to life. Back to hope. And now, I want to stay. Her heart thudded. Stay, she repeated, breathless. In Helmgrove, Rowan said. If you'll have me. If the village will let me work, help rebuild, earn my keep. I'm done fighting. I'm done carrying messages that lead only to death. Alara blinked away the sudden sting of tears. Rowan, you don't have to ask. He smiled, small, tired, but real. The first real smile she had seen from him. But the moment was broken by distant sounds, shouting, hurried footsteps, coming from the southern road. Alara and Rowan exchanged a tense glance before hurrying to the edge of the village. A group of villagers stood pointing at something moving through the snow. Figures. 6 of them. Tattered clothing. No weapons drawn. Refugees. A woman collapsed in the snow. A man carried a child wrapped in cloth. Another staggered, leaning on a stick. Alara rushed toward them, the others close behind. Please, the man with the child gasped, frost on his beard. We escaped the valley. The fighting, it spread. We had nowhere to go. Alara's heart clenched. Behind her, Rowan stepped forward. Helmgrove will take you in, Rowan said before anyone else could speak. We'll make room. The war will keep moving, but this village will stand. Alara looked at him, and in his eyes, she saw not the soldier he had been, but the man he had become. A man choosing peace. A man choosing life. A man choosing them. The villagers moved quickly, gathering blankets, bringing the refugees inside, clearing space in the remaining cottages. Marek barked instructions with surprising strength for his age. As Alara and Rowan worked side by side, the sun finally pushed through a break in the storm clouds, casting a pale golden glow over the snow. It was weak. Fragile. But it was light. For the first time in months. Alara stood still for a moment, breath misting before her, watching the sunrise paint the ice in soft colors. Rowan stepped beside her, his hand brushing hers. "Is this how your winters usually end?" he asked. "No," Alara said, smiling faintly. "But maybe this one will be different." Rowan nodded. "Then let's make it so." And as the first true dawn of peace touched the wounded village, Alara realized something profound. The winter that refused to end had finally met people who refused to surrender. And together, they would rebuild. Hand by hand. Breath by breath. Hope by fragile hope. Until Helmgrove rose again from the snow.